Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the ProfNoctis Show. I'm Evan and we are so excited for our upcoming interview this episode with Night Sky Prince, aka Ryan. Wade, what do we need to know about Ryan and what are some checklist things that we can do to make sure that we're supporting ProfNoctis in all the ways that we can?
Absolutely. So today we are excited to have Night Sky Prince. He is brilliant. He is not only a Final Fantasy VII creator, but he's got some great theories, some ideas, and you're going to love the way that he processes some of the themes that are present in this game. Cannot wait for you to hear a little bit more of his story and all that. As far as the channel is concerned, we want to remind everybody, make sure that you are liking and subscribing on all of our videos. We've had an amazing season of growth here, and we really just want to spread this to even more people, and it helps us a ton if you will like and subscribe over on YouTube, as well as subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts available. Leave a comment and rate us and all that kind of stuff. We would love to hear from you. And with that, hey everybody, welcome to the ProfNoctis Show. And today I am not only joined by Evan, say hey Evan,
Yeah. Hey everybody, good to see you.
but we are delighted to have a very special guest today. We have the one, the only, the Night Sky Prince. What's up, Ryan?
Hello, everyone. How's it going?
I am so excited to have you on the show today because I know that first of all, you have been like one of the big voices in theories and takes and ideas about what's going on in this trilogy, but also just for everybody in the chat and listening and all this stuff. You're also just one of the coolest guys that I know,
Oh
right?
man. Oh,
Ryan
thanks.
and
Yeah.
I. Ryan and I got to meet back in the Final Fantasy 16 launch event in LA, and ever since then, like I remember sitting on the couch next to you when there was like a lull and like this meet and greet sort of thing. I sat next to you, and I was like, "Holy crap! I'm sitting next to NSP right now. Like, are you freaking kidding me?" And you were one of the just like most approachable, kind, just like down to earth dudes that I'd ever met, and like it
Oh,
was
thank
it
you.
was awesome. So absolutely excited to hang out with you right now.
Mm, I appreciate that a lot, man. Thank you. I thought you were just the coolest guy as well. And I mean, I find everything that you do, especially with like, how you're teaching Final Fantasy, getting the youth into one of the
Yeah,
greatest series of all time. Very respectable
definitely.
work, sir.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Well, yeah, I mean, your videos oftentimes come up in our classroom, as a matter of fact, and it's just like, hey,
Really?
yeah, seriously. So, I mean, I guess like through your videos and stuff, you can consider yourself a guest lecturer in a university classroom. How cool is that? Um,
Wow.
so
Wow.
that's
That's that's crazy.
so yeah, I always tell my students about you, and they love your videos and stuff. So, which is maybe in some small, very very tiny way, you just recently had a huge milestone that maybe some of my students contributed to because you just hit 100K plus
Yes,
over on
sir.
YouTube. So
Yes,
congrats,
sir.
that's massive.
Oh,
Great
thank
job.
you. Thank you so much. I've been doing this 7 years, I think, as of this year. So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, man, it's crazy. I've seen so many ups and downs of the YouTube, but I actually think YouTube is probably at its best point right now.
Yeah.
Because when I think back on YouTube 7 years ago and some of the stuff now that's so trivial to get through. Like before we didn't even have like, how now when you upload, it'll actually check and make sure that you didn't violate any copyright stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That stuff wasn't there a few years ago.
You were in the Wild West
Just a
back
few
then.
years
Oh
ago.
my gosh.
Yeah, you had to upload in guest and like, pray a couple of hours later you didn't get an email saying,
Oh my
"Oh,
gosh.
No.
yeah, demonetized," because yeah, so YouTube,
Demonetized.
YouTube, yeah, YouTube has only gotten better, I think, on multiple fronts.
Oh man, that's wild to think. So like my channel has only been up for a year and maybe a couple of months at this point. So like I'm just taking for granted all of these like quality of life luxuries that we've got now. But you paved the
Yeah.
way for that. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear a little bit. I'm shocked to hear that you've been in this for 7 years. I really would have thought it was like maybe year 15, year 10. I don't even know. But 7 years just doesn't seem as long as I guess the library of videos that you've put out. So I would love to hear, if you don't mind, how did you get involved in this? Like, what has
Mm.
that 7 year period been like? Basically, how did you become like and get to where you are right now?
Okay, great. So if any of your students are watching this, don't do what I did. That's the first advice. Um, I was in college and I was just struggling the whole time. Um, I was not making good grades.
Mm,
I was studying my best, but I wasn't doing too well, honestly. I was a computer science major, so I was
mm,
already in a pretty difficult major
Yeah.
as it was. And I was a kid who, honestly, in high school, I slept through most of my classes. Like
mm,
I was a terrible student in high school. But when you turn around 18, 19, you graduate, you start to think, oh yeah, I really need to actually do something with my life, right? Otherwise, I'm going to be a loser.
yeah,
So, college was kind of like when I decided to start getting serious, but it's
mm,
kind of hard to just start getting serious at that point because you don't have like the study habits and all the other things that kind of make you a successful student by default.
mm,
Add into the fact that I also have like the most chronic ADHD and like all these other factors going for me, and I have like a very atypical like learning style as it
mm,
is. And so, one day I just decided, you know what? I'm quitting. And I had actually gotten to like my senior year, believe it or not,
mm.
when I decided to do this.
Wow.
Terrible idea. I don't know.
Oh, your senior
Month,
year of college, like,
my senior year. Yeah.
wow, I mean, I don't know how many more credits you had, but that's like almost the finish line. You're like, I'm done.
Dog, I
What?
needed like 7 classes.
What
Okay,
led you to
what?
Don't
that decision?
yeah.
Yeah, what was it that you just
Seriously.
finally tipped you over the edge and you said, "This, you know what? It's time to move on and do something different."
I was just stressed out. It was
Yeah.
a
Mm,
terrible it was a terrible decision, honestly, and like, kind of maybe not so much in hindsight because I'm like, "Oh, well,
Mhm.
I'm here now," right?
Sure.
But at the time, it was kind of a just like a purely like emotionally driven decision. And I had like a huge like negative thought cycle at the time where I'm
Yeah.
like, oh,
mm,
my grades are so bad, my GPA is so bad, no one's gonna hire me anyways. It's terrible. Don't think like that for anyone who's watching, going through this. Don't think like that. But actually, it was during that time where I was like, okay, well, if I'm not gonna be in college anymore, what am I gonna do with my life?
mm,
So I started like looking into things where I was like, I wonder what I could do to make a little extra money. And then I saw like, oh, okay, well, I bet if I upload YouTube videos, I can make like maybe a couple $100 extra a month.
mm.
That
Sure, yeah.
was that was the original plan. I was like,
Okay.
I see other people doing it, and I bet I could do it. And so I just like, I just downloaded some editing software that was free. I bought a $40 microphone on off Amazon. I did not even get a pop filter because at the time I was like, no, a pop filter's an eight extra dollars,
That's
and
gonna
I
cut
don't
into
want to
my
pay for
budget.
it. Yeah, I'm like, ooh. I'm like, I'm already spending $40 here on the microphone, bro. Like, let's just wait and see if it takes off. And then
Dude.
so cheap microphone, no pop filter, and I just started uploading. And then on my sixth video got 300,000 views.
Whoa!
What?
Yeah,
Oh my god.
yeah, and which is like unheard of, right?
Yeah, it
Most
is.
most people grind and grind for a really long
Oh,
time. It's to the point of where like when like people ask me for advice, I'm like, man, like I do have advice, but I'm like, dude, I lucked out stupid
yeah.
early.
So I gotta ask the question.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what was the
Yeah, what
video?
was the
And what
video?
had you been making for the 5 before that?
Oh, so the video was 7 reasons that Square Enix games take so long to make.
Oh, educational.
It
Right,
is kinda
right, right.
educational.
And looking back in hindsight, I could actually make that video a lot better and give a lot more detail oriented
Of course.
answers. And But at the time, I think what was happening is that we had Final Fantasy 15 that was
Mhm.
taking an incredibly long period of time, as you know, to
Yeah.
get out. um,
What a trend.
we had Final Fantasy 7 remake that had got
Mhm.
announced, and then it also just went quiet for a really long time. And then we also had Kingdom Hearts 3, which followed
Mhm.
the same pattern as the other two. And so there was just like this burning curiosity from people about like, what is taking so long for these games? Back
Yeah.
when like, in the Squaresoft days in the 90s and the 2000s, and they were just pumping these titles out, and like every
Yeah.
year they had a blockbuster out, and now it's like, 6 years and everyone's like,
Mhm.
where are these titles at? And so I think, just the concept of that video and people's curiosity around where those titles were
Yeah.
generated just a ton of interest, because there was a guy who thought he had an answer. He didn't really have that much of an answer. Now he does. He has a better answer now. Probably
Yeah.
Yeah,
not that great still, but
well, I gotta ask, what would you change about that video today? Like, what would your answer be? Because I mean, we're still kind of in that, even though the last year we've seen Dawn
Mm,
Trail, Rebirth, and 16, but there was a good
mm.
time between those,
So
before 16 was released.
right. So I think the thing that I definitely got right in that was the use of like a lot of proprietary technology.
Mm,
So Square and just a general common thing for Japanese developers to do, not as common nowadays.
mm,
In part because of a lot of the hurdles that happened when they transitioned to the HD era with PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, was they tend to build a lot of their own tech in house,
mm,
right? And games now are so complex that building all of that technology in house takes
mm,
years. And then you need teams of people to continue to maintain that technology,
um,
right? Yeah, but back in like PS2 days, they'd make Final Fantasy 10, and then they'd say, okay, let's make a brand new engine for Final
yeah,
Fantasy 12, right? And nowadays, that's like, why would you do that?
why?
That's gonna like that's just a waste of resources
Yeah,
now. And but it was so much easier and simpler back then because the technology isn't as insane as it is now. And of
yeah,
course, they were still kind of operating on those standard principles when they first transitioned, and then they realized, oh, we really can't do that anymore. But what I think I got maybe a bit wrong was that it was something that was, I mean, most of it is not even like a specifically Square Enix problem. It's
mm,
really just a symptom of like the broader AAA games industry,
yeah,
and how video games now are so expensive to make. And the average dev time is like 5 to 7 years. So I mentioned that, like, I've been doing this YouTube thing for 7 years, but really, if I was a AAA game developer, that would only represent one release,
right.
probably.
Which is insane to think about.
Yeah.
And this is such an important conversation, especially today, right? I mean,
Mm.
when we record this, we are 2 days out from the release of Astrobot, which took
Yeah.
what, 3 years and 60 team members?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
it is just like it's blown up reviews, just like absolute, like off the charts popularity, and it's a success, right? But it took
Yeah.
3 years. Now it doesn't have the scope and it doesn't have all of the things that say a Final Fantasy has, but there is a real metric of success with that, and so I think there's something to be said about that sort of thing. It's interesting to hear you say that, especially with a computer science background and
Mm.
kind of this knowledge of Square Enix and their development time and stuff. So,
Yeah.
have you played Astrobot by any
I have
chance?
not gotten the chance
I
yet,
haven't either. So,
but I am hoping to get one soon, because I grew up on platformers,
yeah,
Banjo-Kazooie, Mario 64, those sorts of games, and so
great.
it's right up my alley personally.
Y-
Yeah.
Is that what you started playing games with? Was like the 64? Tell us a little bit about what made you kind of interested and fall in love with video games. Because it sounds like you
Mm.
like them a lot.
So my first two video games were Wolfenstein
Hmm.
on like DOS.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then
Yeah, I
my
remember that.
other my other my other first game was Mario 3,
Oh,
It's
which
a
is
great one.
still one of the greatest video games of all time. I
it's
will fight anyone over. It's the best 2D Mario.
Do you think Wade
oh
kind
the
of
best
looks
2D.
like the guy from
Yeah.
Wolfenstein, the first one, the blonde guy who sits his face in the corner? Look,
Like in
just
the corner.
look
That
mean
could be
and
me.
look mean,
Look mean. And then you have to
dude.
look
You
around like the
he
little guy.
Yeah,
does.
I
Okay.
can see it. I can see it.
Funny story,
Um,
Evan. You're not the first person that said that to me. Like they've
Whoa.
made me do that face before. Like I was ready.
yeah, so yeah, and like Mario 3 was insanely good. And like it's one of those things that's so baked in my brain.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can like immediately see those like red curtains from the opening
Oh,
like anywhere,
right.
and like I just get excited for that game.
Yeah.
That game was
And
wild.
you know, like one of the privilege I think too that like kind of millennials had growing up is that like we got to see the transition from 2D to 3D
Mhm.
games. And
Yeah.
I- like I know that like most people younger will never like really get to have that experience where you see a 3D game for the first time. Or like or a huge technological leap, right? Like
Honestly, I mean,
yeah,
not just the PS1 era. For me, you know,
yeah.
seeing Mario 64 really sold it for
Mm,
me because it was I've played all of these side-scrolling Marios. I played Mario RPG, and that's like the closest to a 3D Mario that I had. But Mario 64 really showed me what the future of gaming was like. Now you go back and play
yeah.
64, and it's like, oh man, this is a little crude in some ways. Like it's just very like, kind of difficult in those cases. But was there a specific game like that for you? Was it 64? What was the first 3D aha moment for you?
Yeah. Which one really blew
Yeah,
your mind?
Mario 64 was
Mm,
like the first like true 3D game, right? And you
yeah.
know, as I mentioned, like with like Wolfenstein before, which was like kind of like pseudo 3D, where it was like 2D sprites like kind of propped up in like a 3D environment, right? But it wasn't truly three-dimensional graphics like as we think of it now.
Hmm.
And I just remember uh like this is like one of my earliest memories really was being at a Target and seeing the warp pipe because they had kiosks there. And yeah, seeing the warp pipe and Mario jumping out of the warp pipe at the opening of the game. And
Wow.
I'm like, you know, I'd already been playing like Mario 3 at
Hmm.
home. And so when I went to Target and I saw that, it was like it was like, what is this? And like I just remember, you know, screaming at the top of my lungs. I was like, "Mom, you gotta see this. Go, go, go." And of course, you know, I left the store like kicking and screaming because I
Yeah.
was like, we gotta get Mario. We gotta get the 3D monster.
Dude, the best thing they used to do was when they would have the like TV way up at the top of the shelf and the little controller that you could hold. And so when your parents were
Yeah.
shopping, you could go play the game like while you were waiting.
Hmm.
That was the best
Oh,
sales pitch for those things.
it was, and like what was so awesome about it too for parents was that it was like cruise control from being able to get your shopping done.
Hmm.
Because you know, like my mom would just like she'd drop me off like right there. She can go get like all her shopping done, and I'd be right there when she came back.
How cool
Yeah.
was it that they let you explore the 3D just by doing the castle kind of first, right? Well, didn't you do the castle first? Like they just let you run around a castle
Yeah.
because they were like, "You've
And you
never
would
done this."
unlock
Right.
further parts, but yeah, just the castle alone could have been a game in and of itself at that point because like it was already amazing. But then the fact that they've added all of these levels on top of that is like, how big is this game?
How do you think that
Right.
video games kind of have shaped as you grew up a little bit, right? They kind of helped you fall in love with them as a form of entertainment, but it sounds like they've had an impact on you as you've kind of grown and developed and gotten older and went to college and things like that. How have they kind of walked alongside you and impacted you as you've kind of grown up?
Oh wow, that's a great question. So I've always been obsessed with video games. I always saw something like really, really, really special in them. You know, I've always liked, you know, all media really, but I think video games have always been particularly important to me because of the interactivity, right? The fact that you are in that role and you're the one taking control of that character. and moving them around in space and making the decisions and actually going through the motions of the story. So I think even at a young age, I kind of realized that like in like I guess this may sound somewhat pretentious to say even, but like video games, I kind of saw them as like the ultimate art form, right?
Mm.
Because it would take every single art form almost in a way that humanity has ever come up with and then put it in one place and then add this really cool element where you were able to interact with the music, with the visuals, with the characters and the writing and all these other elements. So I'm this is like this is bringing like all of human history in a way together into one place, right? Like
Yeah.
engineering, art, like music, like all of it is like coming in here, like to one space. And actually, I mean, this is where my soft spot for Final Fantasy comes in, is because I
Mm.
really think that that was the series that where I really realized at a young age that like, okay, that's what this is. Um, and it was when I play games like, in particular, FF7 and FF10.
Mm.
Those games for me, I watched, plenty of anime and like films and other stuff growing up. But I felt like those games had stories beyond anything else that I had ever consumed at the time. And like I think that like you could have took those same stories and maybe made animated films about them or something like that. But there was this element of the fact that I was the one who went through that journey
Yeah.
and I assumed the role of the character that made it stood out so much more. And so, yeah, I think even like preteens, I had like this realization that, man, this is like beyond anything else that we're doing. Like all of people. you know?
Ryan, that is exactly what I mean, that's the core of
Yeah.
my research, by the way. That was my
Right.
dissertation. Like, what does playing a video game do to the brain and create memories and all this stuff? And can you experience a story even more profoundly by having that agency of control? And so you've exactly said that. There is an element of it's a storytelling to the next level,
Mhm.
that an animated film couldn't quite do because you're not controlling it. So just yeah, I can cite you in research now. That's so
Mm.
good. Um,
Yeah, and my teachers always got mad when
Good.
did a speed run on a book, but they don't care in a video game.
Yeah.
yeah, well, that's fair. That's fair. Um, so you mentioned Final Fantasy, of course, and
Mm.
we're gonna get into Final Fantasy 7 here in a minute. I gotta ask, what was your first Final Fantasy?
So 7 was my first Final Fantasy.
Okay, okay.
Right.
How
And
did you get into 7 then? Like, was it through the commercials? Because their commercials were amazing back then. Like,
yeah, man, the commercials were amazing. So the commercials were something that I saw back then. Funny enough, I actually played Final Fantasy 7 first on a PC.
oh wow,
Yeah, so I
Oh, so
had like
much
the
later.
I had like the PC port first, which is actually very different
yeah.
than most people. I did end up getting the PS1 version, but I got it later. So
Mhm,
my first experience with FF7 was on PC, and like I would always see the commercials and the art
mhm.
everywhere, and I wanted the game, and I never was able to get the game until like a few years later, and then eventually I had the PC port, and I immediately realized the brilliance in the game. I was like, this is like one of the most genius games I ever played. Just seeing like the transition of like the opening FMV movie to like
Mhm.
the in-game graphics, and
Right.
it was mind-blowing at the time. And that was a super special experience. But I think actually 10 when I played 10 years later, that was kind of the moment for me where I like really doubled down
Mhm.
on the series. And for I think with 10 especially too, this was kind of the era when fully voice acted video games
Hmm,
were becoming a thing.
sure.
Yeah.
And so when I was seeing 10 and it was the characters had acting now and there was this level of tangibility to it that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
Um wow. I was so immersed into Final Fantasy 10. And I think that like maybe the scene of Yuna dancing on the water
Mm,
was
yeah,
like that may have been a scene that changed the trajectory of my life.
yeah. How old were you when you first
Yeah.
played that one?
10?
10 years old. Yeah,
No,
that.
no. I mean, I
Oh,
was. Oh, you. I was like, do you mean 10 or do you mean 7?
Final Fantasy 10.
When I
Sorry,
first played, when I first played 10, I want to say I was in fourth grade.
fourth grade.
So I had to be 11, something like that. I would think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
You mentioned.
That
Oh, sorry, Wade.
scene is powerful. And
Yeah.
as a child, kind of preteen at that point, how did that story kind of, you say it changed the trajectory of your life. As an 11-year-old, talk to me about that. Because it's a little bit different playing it today. You revisited 10 not too long
Yeah.
ago, as a matter of
Mm.
fact. So what do you remember from that first experience of that dance in that preteen mind, and what did that do for you?
So I think whenever you look back on these games, right, it's really interesting. Like one thing I've noticed about people is that like in discourse about these games, sometimes people will say, "Ah, it's just nostalgia," you
Mhm.
know, and of course, nostalgia is always kind of an element with these things. But
Yeah.
what I've actually found as I've gone back on these games was that there was something about my subconscious that was like picking up on things and realizing they were incredibly deep, but
Mm.
not having the words or the mental maturity to actually articulate what it was that made those moments special, right?
Oh,
Like, and now as a grown man, yeah, I can really dig deep into why that scene with Yuna dancing was powerful, or why,
yeah.
the scene with Aerith in Seven is powerful. But like, as a kid, you just know it's like you're feeling a thing. And it
Mhm.
got you to feel a thing. A lot of times you think it's because the cool imagery. And of course that is what gets you into it, right? You think Cloud has a cool sword,
Mhm.
and you like you think Midgar is cool just because it looks cool and not because of the deeper commentary that Midgar is actually making, right? And it's
Mhm.
just like it's not that you don't, or I should say, like, you don't consciously know those things. But I do think that even as a child, you do subconsciously kind of realize, like, there is some symbolism here that I can't quite all
Hmm.
connect
Mm.
together. Like, but I do understand that I'm resonating with this on some type or deeper level. And it's telling me something about life and how I view life.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that is yet, but I feel it.
That's really cool. Could you guys maybe explain a little bit about what that scene is, just briefly, for those who maybe haven't played the game or don't know kind of what we're referencing when you're talking about Yuna dancing on the water? Just real quick.
Okay. So there is a scene where Sin, this giant whale monster that's representing all of humanity's transgressions, who goes around attacking civilizations, making sure that those civilizations never get more technically advanced, uh, and they never like basically build their civilization up. Their culture kind of stays stagnant as a result. And Sin has just attacked an island called Kilika, destroyed it. Um, we don't know what the exact death toll is, but it's presumed that quite a number of people died. In fact, during the scene, when the scene goes like underwater, it shows that there's quite a few number of bodies that are laying like within the water.
Hmm.
And Yuna basically has to perform this spiritual ritual where she sends the souls of the dead to a place called the Far Plane, which is where those souls can rest. Because if those souls don't go to rest, they can end up becoming fiends, and which are essentially monsters that then attack people and cause more death. And so, and it's a very beautiful scene where Yuna essentially walks on water and then she dances on water. And as the faith, the souls of the dead emerge, they basically cause her to levitate on the water and pushes the water up, and she's just dancing on the water. And so it's this release of souls and this joining of people together to mourn the loss of the dead. Uh, but it's also kind of like this it displays this burden that Yuna has, where Yuna has to keep guiding all of these people who are dying way earlier than they should as a result of sin. Has to keep guiding their souls to the far plane. And her ultimate journey, it kind of like reinstills her resolve that we have to allow this tragedy, or we have to stop this tragedy from continuing to happen. And so that scene is one that's really beautiful. I mean, visually it's beautiful, and I think, if you look at it even now, the visuals on that have barely aged a day. It's still so gorgeous to look at, but it also just really represents a lot of deep things that are happening with the story and with Yuna's character arc in particular.
That was incredibly well said.
Thank you.
Incredibly, maybe one of the best summations that I've heard of the presenting problem in Final
Yeah.
Fantasy X, and especially Yuna's dance. So thank you for that. We're gonna clip
Oh,
that.
appreciate
That
it.
was a good one, man.
Yeah, please. Yeah, thank you.
Off the cuff. It was just
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
seriously,
like you loaded it up, like locked and loaded, put the cartridge
Yeah.
in, and we were off to the
I,
races.
I, I was about to, but you said it way more eloquently than I ever could. That was amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about 10 lately. So
Oh,
yeah.
really?
Well, yeah, and I've been following that journey a little bit, watching a few of your videos, and certainly your summation video on it after you finished it all, and why it just still works. And it's compelled me to replay it myself. Now I'm a little swamped right now, but as soon as I get a chance, 10 is
Yes.
one that I want to revisit because it's beautiful, just like you said.
Mm.
But that's what this series really is. I mean, we see this beauty and this technological immersion from the storytelling, the acting, the FMV, the videos, and all this stuff. But and that draws us in. But then there's this deeper level of understanding, the symbolism, the meaning spiritually, as humanity in relationships. There's all of these different layers.
Okay, everyone, it is that time of the episode where we limber up and do our mini game stretch break, and we are here with Ryan, aka Night Sky Prince. So let's get some stretches in real quick, everybody. Wherever you are, wherever you find yourself, it's okay. Whatever you're dealing with, whatever's occupying your mind right now, you're gonna get through it, right, guys? They're gonna get through it.
Well, yeah, if I can get through these stretches, I'm feeling it.
You're gonna get through it. You're gonna get through it. It'll be great. But it wouldn't be a mini game stretch break without our intro music. Let's hit that intro. 1, 2, 3.
Y'all went for the second round on that one. I was done after one. That was great.
Well, Clark,
I didn't know how long we were going.
No,
I
Clark
tried
did
a-
too. Last
You
time we
did.
were with
I
Baby
tried
Seal.
a pro move there from Clark, right? Schrodinger's Baby Seal, where I took out my headphone so that I would not be distracted by the noise. But
As he called it, my intentional disrespect for the melody.
your intentional disrespect. That's exactly right.
We are here
Let's go.
with Ryan, Night Guys Prince, taking a little break from the interview. Hope you are enjoying it. We're going to do our mini game stretch break now. So I have the bingo wheel of vulnerability, numbered 1 through 50 are balls inside. We will pick a number here, and then Wade's going to ask questions from. What do we have for our question deck today, Wade?
For our question deck, we have the Geek Therapy card deck from our friends over at Geek Therapeutics. These are 87 practices to improve thoughts, build insight, take action in your life, and de-stress. And that's what we're about right now.
I love it. Okay, so numbers 1 through 50. Ryan, as our guest, which number would you like to guess?
Let's go with 12.
Okay, 12. Wade?
32.
37 is my guess. All right, Ryan, tell me when to stop, and I'll grab one of these bingos.
And stop.
All right, it's a yellow one. $40. So, listener, if you
40.
guess 40, the numbers were 1 through 50. If you guess 40, you got it right. Thanks for participating. Give us the 40th question there, Wade.
40th question. Okay, here we go. This one, the topic is video games. So here is the question. Action and adventure games tend to require the player to earn items to progress through the game to solve puzzles. There are times when progress cannot be obtained without earning a special item to solve the puzzle in front of you. So, what problem and what item what problem is challenging you today, and what item do you think you still need to solve this problem? What
Hmm.
What?
problem is I know, right? What
Wow.
problem is
Okay.
facing you today, and what item do you think that you still need?
We'll go first if you want some time to think, but we'll offer you the floor if you would like to kick us off, but no pressure.
No, you go first. I had to
Okay.
think on this one.
I gotcha, yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, I have been in a season of life where I am not being able to get past things that are not working out, whether it's a problem
Mm,
that I have, something I'm trying to fix, a problem I'm trying to solve. I get stuck in that kind of negative ruminating loop where I'm thinking about the problem when I want to be more present in another situation. Like I just can't, like I just keep thinking about all the same solutions over and over again, maybe hoping that I'll come up with some quick fix that'll save me some money or time, or I'll kind of move past the problem. And so I think the item that I need is honestly right in front of me. And I think it is a pen and paper. I think is the magical item I need. I
nice.
think I need a pen and paper and the resilience and the fortitude to be able to actually write these things down. And I found myself writing some of those things down before I left town this weekend. And I really found that it helped break that cycle and that loop in my mind and helped me to really enjoy the things that I was doing more rather than just being
Mm,
stuck and ruminating on my problems because I felt like they were down on paper. I didn't have to keep trying to remember them over and over, and it helped me to really kind of move past it. So I think what I need to do is engage with a pen and paper a little bit more myself.
Wow.
that's good. That's a good answer. Good answer, Evan. I'll go next. My favorite item in a video game of all time, is, the hook shot from A Link to the
Mm.
Past, Zelda: A Link to the Past, and, like, the thing that makes me think about that right now is, like, when I was playing that game as a kid, and even when I pick it up today, you always see something, you're like, "I know there's a way for me to get over there, but I don't know how to do it," and once you get the hook shot, you're able to zip right over there as though it is nothing. And I feel like I'm at a point right now, at least in my week, at the start of the week, in my life, maybe, where it's like I see the destination where I kind of want to be, maybe in like 6 months or in a year or something like that. And I just need some metaphorical hook shot to like launch me over there, you know? And so, like, that would just make things a lot easier. Now, what does that mean for me? I think that it probably means that I've got to kind of figure out the exact toolkit that I need, personally, maybe in opportunities and all that kind of stuff to launch myself into the next phase or chapter of my life. But yeah, a metaphorical hook shot for me. What about you, Ryan?
Love it.
Okay, so I do think I actually have a good answer. Your pen and paper analogy or discussion really inspired something in me. So I would actually say what I need is my iPad over here and my Apple Pencil and it's drawing.
Yeah.
And the problem that I have is that I stress out a lot in life. Like I just have a tendency to just really hold a lot of stress. And I found that like one of the only things that I can really do other than going to the gym to really relieve that stress is draw. And I don't
Mm,
ever share any of my artworks or anything that I work on with anyone. However, it's just something that I do for myself purely and it allows me to kind of connect with a side of myself that I don't get to express anywhere else. And so it's just creativity for creativity's sake, and there's just a joy in doing that, especially when there's no obligation to it. That allows me to be within my own skin in a weird way, um, and not have to, do something that like is for the sake of others in any capacity. If that makes
I
sense.
I love it so
Mm,
much.
Thanks.
Thank you
yeah.
for that, Ryan. That's great.
Thanks
Uh,
so much for participating and sharing with us, everybody. Let's get one more little baby stretch in. Everybody, we're going to get back to the episode in a second, but make sure that you're nice and stretched out and relaxed. And whether it's a pen and paper or whether it's your iPad, or my blank, absolutely blanked on what you
A
said,
hook
Wade. A
shot.
hook shot. Thank you. I was like,
Not not a real
I
Zelda
panicked
fan.
because I
That's
was
what I've
going
just
in order,
discovered.
and I was like, oh no. Or whether it's a hook shot, or whether it's the ability to remember the things that your friends just told you.
Sure.
Those things can be helpful as well. We hope that you are a little bit inspired, and let's get back to that episode.
What I'd really love to do is to hear a little bit about your experience with Final Fantasy VII. You played Final Fantasy
Mm.
VII as a kid before 10, so I'm presuming you were like 8, 7, 8, 9 years old
Yeah,
at
yeah,
this
it's pretty
point.
young.
And
Yeah.
you said that it captivated you and stuff. So even as a kid, your experience of Seven leading you into this series and then rekindling that love of Seven through the remake project, especially the lead up into it and the hype and all that stuff. Talk to us
Mm.
a little bit about the enduring memory and meaning of Seven from your childhood to today.
Man, so if we're talking about like Seven from the perspective of me as a child, and honestly, even as a teenager, because that's when Advent Children came out and a lot of the compilation titles came
Mm,
out. So because of that, it felt like I was experiencing Final Fantasy VII throughout my whole youth.
right.
So it's really interesting because of that. Final Fantasy VII in particular feels like this period of life rather than like this singular moment in a way that a
Mm,
lot of video games can, especially because of how fast a lot of that stuff was coming out back then. But so oh gosh, like again, it goes back to not really picking up on how deep a lot of that stuff is, but it just looked so cool. It just looked
yeah.
so cool. This guy is riding on a motorcycle with a sword. And I just remember the scene where they escape from Shinra HQ being the coolest scene
Yeah.
that I had ever yeah, it was just mind blowing, man. Cloud like breaking through the glass and he's got the sword. And then it gets even better because then there is a mini game. Then
Yeah.
there's a mini game when you're on the bike and you're just swiping the sword at the guys as they like drive by. I'm like, this is the
It's the
coolest thing
best.
ever. Um, and again, it was so stimulating. And I guess like as I grew older, it also kind of played into my so this was Advent Children came out like 2005
I have
and
something like that.
something like that. And that's when emo culture was a really big
All
deal,
It was
right?
right.
big.
Yes.
That's when emo culture was a really big deal. And Advent Children like became like this really weird cultural intersection between like emo culture and like JRPGs.
Hmm.
And somehow, like, for a very long period of time, emo culture and like JRPGs were like intrinsically linked. Like, you know? And so like Final Fantasy VII became like kind of like the center point of my life once again, where it was like kind of updated to have a look that was relevant to my identity and the cultural identity of a lot of Western culture at the time, as
What
it was
Mm.
so big.
what did that look like
And
specifically for you? It sounds like you had like kind of outfits, maybe a hairstyle change. How
oh,
deep did you go?
great question. My hair was long and straightened down to here.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, and I was wearing all black all the time.
Sure.
Except it was funny because I became an emo in the middle of the school year, so I still had white shoes, and I had to convince my mom to buy me black shoes. So I'd be wearing all black and then white shoes, so I'd look kind of like Goofy.
Did you get your black
So
shoes eventually?
I got my black
Were
shoes
you
eventually
like,
to match
was
the rest of my fits.
it Vans or Converse? Did you have like a specific brand that you really wanted?
I think I had some Vans if I recall
Yeah,
correctly,
had to be
because
the
that
black
was
Vans.
yeah, man, because that was what was big.
mhm.
I remember like trying to like learn guitar. I got a cheap guitar for like remember those like guitar amp bundles that were like 100 something dollars, and like I try to like learn like electric guitar because I'm like, oh my god, like this is like like all the emo girls would think I'm so cool if I could like
Mhm.
learn to play electric guitar.
We were this close to a Night Sky Chemical Romance, if
We
Oh,
only.
were, yeah,
that
yeah. I mean, oh, dude, I love Gerard Way.
Of
Oh my
course.
god, dude, My Chemical Romance is like everything. And then, God, dude, I don't even know if like, do does Gen Z even know about like AMVs like that? Maybe.
yeah,
Do
I
they?
assume.
yeah.
I actually don't know, but like if they don't, that was like people would basically take a song and then they would just like make like a music video to
Oh,
like a game or an anime to
yeah.
that song. And yeah, I mean, may seem cringe now, but that was life.
TikTok's kinda
Millions of
coming around
views,
with
man.
that. I mean, I see things very similar to it, and I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
man, this is like the resurgence of bell bottoms or something, like, time's just circular." So
Yeah, yeah, no, it's coming back. It's coming back. It's coming back in the form of TikToks. You're so right, because I kind of see it every now and then, and I'm like, I know what that
here
is.
we go. That's a
I work
bandwagon I can jump on. I'll teach teach 'em how.
Yeah.
I do
Yes.
think we're
Yes.
revisiting things that were really good and just can be revisited with better technology. And there's times that that's done well, and there's times that that's done very poorly. I think
Mm,
we're all really excited about a remake or something when it goes really well and it's a great revisioning. And when it feels like it's just a cash grab, we're all kind of nervous. You're like, I'm going to watch it anyways. I'm going to play it anyways because I loved it. But like, please be good. Like, please just be good. I need you to be
Mm.
good. Don't waste my time. And I wonder how you feel about, as we kind of transition into some of your thoughts on the remake trilogy and where you've been. How did you feel when they announced that they were doing the remake? Like, where were you at? Take us back to that moment.
Oh my god, I was kicking and screaming.
Happy or
I
sad?
was kicking and screaming. I was happy. It
Okay.
was, if I'm not mistaken, the announcement trailer is still one of the most viewed video game trailers of all time. I think it's
mhm.
like,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's number one or not, but it's like a top five. Like I
It's
think
up
like
there
the
for sure.
only, yeah, like the only thing that's like touching it is something like a Grand Theft Auto 6 like
Yeah.
reveal trailer.
Yeah.
Aside from that, yeah, it's like it's in like the top 5 or 10 most viewed game trailers of all time. So it was incredible. There are stories about how the developers would watch reaction videos from people to keep their motivation up during the game's development.
Oh.
Mm,
But what I find funny is that it wasn't really just them doing that. I found myself just binging
yeah.
everyone's reaction videos at the time. There was an energy to the announcement of that trailer that has not been replicated with anything at all since. Like people were like, I mean, of course there was still like the old GameTrailers.com video of like Kyle Bosman and all those guys. They were like standing in their chair, like holding their heads, like, oh my god, yeah, like
Mhm.
they're freaking out. Just videos of people screaming. And what I love about that trailer is just how deliberate it was.
Yeah.
It does not say the words Final Fantasy VII at all. And what I think is so beautiful about it is that that trailer starts very obtuse. Like the first few frames of it, you're like, what is this?
Mhm.
Like it makes the most obscure Final Fantasy VII references. And then as you go along in that trailer, the references get more and more
Yeah.
clear and on point. And at some point, the trailer in itself is almost like a how big of an FF7 are you? Because if
Yeah.
you are, you'll recognize it in like almost the first few
Like
frames.
frame 1, right.
Yeah, you're like, "Oh, oh." But if you're
Like,
if you're
is it?
normal,
Is it? If you're normal.
If you
you know,
know.
like the third or fourth shot when they're kinda like zooming out and like showing like Midgar and the lights
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and then you're like and my favorite part, I think actually going back to that GameTrailers.com reaction was just like they were like freaking out and they were saying, "Please don't be a movie. Please don't
Uh,
be a movie." Because that's how
yeah.
everyone that is
You
just
expected it.
exactly yeah, because everyone's like, we had just went through this whole, decade of like FF7 is popular, so we're gonna pump out every FF7 thing possible. And everyone
Mhm.
was begging and pleading for a remake. So everyone's like, please let this be an actual remake, right?
Mhm.
And so in the final shot, which is so beautiful, that's when they get very explicit. This is Final Fantasy VII. If you live under a rock and you haven't noticed all these shots of Midgar, this is Barrett's gun arm, and that's Cloud's Buster sword, and they pan up to it and they show the back of Cloud's head, and then they show the logo, and then the screen just flashes remake.
Remake.
And it's when the screen flashes remake and all of those reactions where everyone they lose it, man. They lose it. And that was also the point for me where I was just like, it's like, okay. And what's funny is that earlier that morning, actually, Siliconera ran an article that said Final Fantasy VII Remake announced exclusively for PS4.
Mm.
And it made the rounds. And at the time when E3 was popular, everyone was like, yeah, that's not happening. Because there's always rumors that, they're going to remake Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
And so everyone just like wrote that off. Everyone was like, it's not happening. And so that's why when you go back and you watch those reaction videos too, it happened right after he announced World of Final Fantasy, which is another really cute Final Fantasy spinoff. I remember one of the big heads for PlayStation at the time, he was there speaking, and then the background turns into like a little live stream thing. And he's like, many years ago, we released a groundbreaking title for PlayStation, and the whole audience just
holds their breath, like, don't hurt me again.
So I don't think that there has ever been another video game announcement that was palpable in the same way that FF7 Remake's first announcement was.
I called Wade. I called him. I was like, hey, we haven't talked in a little while because I don't think I lived near you anymore. And I was just like, but we have to talk. I need to know what you think.
Yeah.
And
that was it. Yeah. I was with a group of people, like I think having dinner or something. Like there were a bunch of people at my house for some reason, and I was watching the press conference on my phone, right? And just kind of like off in a corner while they're like hanging out or whatever it is.
Oh,
and like
no.
I see it. And I start like almost shaking and jittering and stuff. And I finally just said, hey, y'all shut up. Y'all gotta see this. And we're all watching on my little phone at this point. And I was like, this is Final Fantasy VII. They're like, no, it's not. That's like a little kid and stuff. Then you see the Buster Sword. And I think somebody was like, oh, it's that guy from Smash Brothers. I was like, I will end you if you call him that.
Right. And that's exactly what I mean too, is that like you start watching it and you're just like, what is this? And one of the things that's so beautiful about that trailer is how they play into like kind of the mystery of what they're presenting by using a track called Beyond the Wasteland, which is a very foreboding track where it's just like, it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right.
And the phrasing that they use in there, whatever comes, it may bring joy, it may bring fear, and all of this stuff, but whatever it is, like they are coming back. And I rewatched that, especially in light of the story that they are telling in the Remake Trilogy, and I'm like, all along they kind of knew, like, hey, this is going to rub some people like the right way, the wrong way, and there's going to be a lot of curiosity about this for 3 full games. Of course, at that point, I think they were thinking 4 or 5 even, something in there. But to me, when did that trailer drop? 2015? I think it was 2015.
I'll look it up. You guys
2015, because it was a year before Final Fantasy 15 came out.
Yeah. So we get that trailer and we get like little drips of information for 5 years until, what is it? April, I think, of 2020, height of COVID and pandemic and all this kind of stuff. The game releases, most of us are still in lockdown to some degree, and we're just all consuming this thing, and we are all driven online. Right. To talk about it and stuff. So I'm really curious. We have all this expectation, anticipation for this game, this remake, and then remake comes out. And catch us up to speed on where you were with Remake, and then we're going to transition over to Rebirth. 5 years between the trailer announcement of Final Fantasy VII Remake all the way to the height of COVID, the pandemic, we're all locked down. April of 2020, Final Fantasy VII Remake is released, and we play this game, and it has this kind of subtle, um, dare I say, deviation in some ways
Mm,
from
mm,
the original game, where it's clear that this isn't just a remake; it's a full reimagining. Some people have thought sequel, all this stuff. When you finished Remake, where were you in that headspace as far as like, what is this thing? How were you making sense of it? And then I'd love to bounce off that and talk about what Rebirth did.
okay. So what before Remake came out, there were some hints that it was not going to quite follow the same path, right? But
Mm,
for the most part, in all the marketing material that we got, we kind of thought that like, okay, like this is mostly a faithful remake. They're expanding quite a lot of things, but they're not going to deviate too far
mm,
from the beaten path. And depending on who you're talking to and what your perspective of deviation is, I suppose you could definitely argue that they haven't done that in some ways, but in
yeah.
other ways, they definitely have, right? And so when I first beat Remake, it was very weird, right? Because I was fortunate enough to have received a review copy at the time, and so I was playing this ahead of the rest of the world.
Wow.
And imagine sitting on that ending before everyone else.
I cannot imagine.
Yes. Yeah, like sitting on that ending, for like, like a couple of weeks before everyone else got to it. And the whole time I'm just like, "Oh my God, nobody else knows about this." And there wasn't too many people I could really talk to about it.
Yeah.
And my first reaction to it was I really didn't like it. I hated
Yeah.
it. I had a strong, like, visceral negative reaction to it.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people did. That seemed to be like the census of it when people were first getting to it. However, where I noticed the tide began to kind of turn on it was when a lot of theory crafters and a lot of people who were a lot more open minded to it got their hands on it,
Hmm.
and they began to kind of take that material and bring out what they thought the developers' true intentions were with that. So you had like Max Dude, you had Sleep Easy, you had Schrodinger's Baby Seal, and those sorts of people who were real lore masters of FF7, and they were able to kind of make some pretty convincing arguments to people that
Yeah.
actually this has quite a lot of depth to it, and this could actually end up making a better ultimate Final Fantasy VII. Um, and so that really began to shift the perception of that ending the other
Mm,
way for people. Where a common sentiment that I found is that people would say, I kind of hated it when I first watched it. But then I listened to some people kind of talking about it, and it started opening my mind on what this could be. And now I look back on it, and I really love it. It wasn't that really didn't like do it for me personally, right?
yeah.
Because I was still sort of like, and I guess for me personally, the parts of it that were worrying was at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, Zack appears to be revived
Yeah.
either through some sort of time glitch or a multiverse.
Hmm.
There's a lot of conjecture on that, and I don't mean to add to that, but of course, it does appear that in some way, shape, or form, Zack has been resurrected. A guy who dies a few months before the beginning of Final Fantasy VII is essentially alive again. And I mean, kind of the way that I read it was just, is this a fan service resurrection of a character simply because he's popular, right?
Mm,
And I think where my value system was on this is that one of the reasons that I love Final Fantasy VII so much is that as I got older, and I realized how a lot of media didn't kind of show respect for death and character
Mm,
death. And the moment a character got popular, the thing to do was to retcon their
wow.
death and resurrect them or bring them back. And so I'm like, are they taking these sacred moments in Final Fantasy VII and now making it so that like we can just follow the JRPG status quo where if there is something about reality that we don't like, we can just kill God and make reality whatever we want to be. And and this is actually something where actually my respect for Final Fantasy 15 actually kind of comes in a way where I would say that like with Final Fantasy 15, one of the more beautiful things about that game's story is that it subverts the JRPG typical about defying fate. Noctis
Mm,
has to accept his fate,
yeah.
right? There's nothing he can do about it. He has to say that this is my fate. And so that's one thing about 15 that actually um, kind of resonated with me as I
Yeah.
reflected on it, where I was like, I like that. I like that he's not able to just, and I do think that power of friendship, by the way, as a
Mm,
side note, is not as bad as some people think it is, because I do think the most powerful force in the universe is our relationship with others. And I always think that JRPGs are cool and how they abstract that as a force that can overcome any other thing in the world, right?
yeah.
It's why I think, for example, my kids see it because of my blur. I'm a big fan of Persona 3, for example, because I think that game is also really incredible at depicting
Yeah.
that exact thing. So, yeah, I was kind of like, I don't think that there is a way where they could necessarily revive that character and it have the same
Mhm.
meaning for me personally.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing because so many people who came away from remake and didn't have the most positive kind of outlook on it, I guess.
Mm,
A lot of times they are characterized as just like you're almost you're wishing this was exactly the same as the original, and it's like you're just like you can't let go of the past, right? You're like the king of the whispers. You're trying to save like exactly the way it
yeah.
was, right? But the way that you've said it is a great argument here because you've said, um, I'm afraid and cautious that they aren't treating death with the seriousness that they did at the beginning, like it back in
Mm,
1997. And I think that that's a really different conversation to have. It's not
right.
like I'm okay with some changes. My bet, listening to you, is that you're okay with some of the added stuff, like the chapter topside at Jesse's house, right? Some of
Yeah,
the world building
love
things.
love that stuff, right? There are
But
some people who are like, "It needs to stay pure," and I don't have
right.
that. Right.
And so when you're talking about, these themes that were so meaningful and impactful back in the day, how are we subverting these themes? I think that's a really important critique to have. And so what I really want to say is to the listeners, you know, asking these follow-up questions of why doesn't it work now like it did back in the day, and really getting into that, because it's too easy to simply say, well, this person is a purist, right? Like we can't,
Mm,
that is so
mm,
simplistic, and there's always these really great reasons for why something does or doesn't work for us. And so thank you for sharing that. That's really meaningful.
mm.
You talked
Oh, of
about
course, yeah.
before how the way that you've enjoyed games has changed over time, and you have a different appreciation for parts of the story that you did before. And what was amazing about Final Fantasy for you was that you could be the guy who flies through the glass on a motorcycle with a sword, but then you came to realize there's these beautiful moments, right? They kind of dress it up in a way that you feel engaged, and then it impacts you, and you can see things that you want to see in your life through the game.
Mm.
At what point do you think that really changed for you? Is there a moment where like with dancing, that you were like, okay, great, like this is starting to make some sense to me, and like I appreciate this more? Did you have to read some more, gain some more knowledge? Like what got you to the point where you were not necessarily playing to be motorcycle sword guy, but you were playing because it was impacting you?
I think like a great example of realizing my own development as a person through video game was actually not even through a Final Fantasy game. It was through Zelda. It was through
Mm.
Majora's Mask. Now, Majora's Mask was a game that when I played as a kid at launch, I detested it.
It's
I
hard.
thought it's hard, and I came off of Ocarina of Time, right? Where that game was like, at the time, so mind blowing,
Just peak. Yeah.
so mind blowing, right? And so when Majora's Mask came out, it's this weird game. It has this 3-day cycle. It has a gameplay loop that, nothing else has. And it felt so weird and I hated it. And I didn't really get, again, we talk about like subconsciously picking up on themes and stuff, but I was so frustrated with the gameplay at the time that I don't think I could have really picked up on a lot of the deeper stuff that was going on behind the story. So around the time I think I was like 17 or 18 as like a senior in high school, and Twilight Princess was about to come
Mm.
out. And so I was like, oh, okay. I want to pick Majora's Mask back up, right? Because that was the only Zelda game that I felt like I hated that I played, and I loved all the other Zelda games. And I like watched like a couple of videos on it at the time, and it's like, okay, it's got some interesting stuff in it. So I go back, and then I realize that, oh my God, there is so much profound subtext in here in this game. Just like in the first few scenes,
Right.
right? Where like, the Deku scrub like dies and becomes your mask. And then like the father is like looking for his son. And
I
then
had
he notes
forgotten
how
that
like you look.
happened. Like,
Yeah, and then he notes that like you look like his son. And you're like literally wearing his like dead son's face.
oh gosh.
And I'm like, okay. Yeah.
There it is.
Well, like, as a kid, you don't, there's that just goes over your head, right?
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
And then you play it as an adult, and you're like, oh, okay,
This is
yeah,
dark.
that's
This is
I'm the
weird.
worst.
this is a children's game. Okay, let's go, dope. And Majora's Mask, like even that opening scene, it really only gets darker from there,
Yeah.
right? Because you have, I mean, first of all, the name of the world is Termina. Like the
Mhm.
name of the world, like the land that you're in, is called Death.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then you have the moon, the impending death. That's
With an
slowly
angry
like,
face. It's
yeah,
like,
Really
right,
angry.
right. And so, wow, it's like, okay. And so I think Majora's Mask was the experience
Mhm.
where actually I started looking deeper at games
Oh, yeah.
because I realized, oh, there was this game that I thought was just a bad Zelda, a stupid game. And I go back to it, and actually, it's one of the most profound experiences I've ever had with a piece of media.
going back to Final Fantasy VII, do you think that there is an opportunity by the end of part 3 of the remake that people will go back and look at remake and say, this is one of the most brilliant and beautiful pieces of media that I've ever experienced? Is that a possibility, or are we way off tracks there?
I think there's a strong possibility of it, right? It's going to be really interesting though, because I think they have a lot to, and I hate to kind of say this with, a piece of art, but justify,
Mm,
because you do have to think on why they have decided to take things this route.
yeah.
It's a really interesting route to go down, right? There's a lot of conjecture on what Final Fantasy VII Remake even is, right? Like,
Right.
is this a sequel? Is this, like the Evangelion rebuilds,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like a meta sequel? Is it just a remake where they've added like a time element? But I think that regardless of all of that, all those specifics, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a remake with meta awareness that it is a remake. That is
Mm.
what they're attempting to do. Like all the other stuff is just, it's just toppings for like what they're actually trying to do at the highest level. And at the highest level is they're basically saying that this is a remake of a story that knows that it's a remake of a story.
So
Right?
with Rebirth, then, how was that? How did that kind of subvert, reinforce, whatever, your experience of Remake? Did it kind of consolidate and solidify some of those inklings that you had at the end of Remake, or did it? What did that do? Because Rebirth does expand on a lot of these themes, but what was
Mm.
your take and interpretation of some of this stuff?
I think what surprised me the most about Rebirth was how shockingly faithful it was, because my kind of like the way I walked away from Remake is that I was like, okay, well then the next game just needs to go straight into Final Fantasy 7 too, right? Because it seems like
Right?
that's what they want to do. And then I was shocked how much they did not actually do that at all, right?
Yeah.
They really just told um a very similar story with a lot greater detail and more moments
Mhm.
to it than I was expecting, at least until you get to the tail ends
The end. Yeah.
of the game where things do kind of go in a different direction, right?
Well, and this is what you said in your review, which was
Mm,
absolutely amazing, and we're going to link it in the
mm,
comments because if you haven't
mm,
seen Ryan's review of Rebirth and his just assessment immediately after he had played it, like it is perfect. Sometimes I go back to it and stuff, but one of the things that you say is
mm.
Rebirth is best when it's retelling the original stuff because it does it
Yeah.
with all of the flourish, the technology, and the added lore that you would want. And it stumbles a bit when it gets to some of this what you call, I think, the remake stuff.
Yeah, oh yeah, I remember my exact wording, I believe, was it's at its best when it's a remake of Final Fantasy 7 and at its worst when it's Final Fantasy 7 remake.
Remake, that was it.
Yeah,
So well said. So well
yeah,
said.
yeah.
So we really talk about some of the things that worked for people, what didn't work, and especially some of these deviations, like the big scene with Aerith at the end. As you finished up Rebirth, where were you? Like, what was this? Was this like, oh, that was amazing? Was this I'm confused like I was at the end of Remake? Where were you?
So, funny enough, the ending of Rebirth didn't have the same visceral reaction for me as the ending of Remake.
Hmm.
And I think that part of that is just 4 years in between the two of just acceptance of this is what this is. And so what I think is actually kind of funny is that I found that other people seem to have a more visceral reaction to it
Hmm.
and who are more accepting of Remake's ending too. They were a lot of them were kind of the ones who were like, "Yo, what?" Whereas me, I kind of already gone through all the stages of grief with it and kind of accepted that this was the thing. So it's funny. So I feel like I ended up in a more open-minded place than what a lot of other people did who were kind of in denial about what they were wanting to do
Hmm.
um, with this project. So, I mean, when I when I saw the ending, I mean, it was kind of just on par with like what I was expecting. For me, it was like almost verbatim. Like some of the stuff I even said, like I even like predicted spot on that like no one else was even talking about really. Like I was talking about like I was like, no, Zach and Cloud are definitely fighting Sephiroth together. Like I mean, there was no other way around it. And people were like, oh no, they're not going to be on screen and interact with each other. I'm like, no, no,
Uh,
no, they have to fight together because that's the only escalation of the story, right? And
mhm.
so right now I'm also predicting that not only are they going to fight together again in the third part, but I feel like the only escalation they can do from both Rebirth and the original game would be to have Cloud do the Omni Slash, but it's not just Cloud, it's also Zack doing that dual Omni Slash against
Oh
Sephiroth.
my gosh.
And I guess my controversial part about it is that I'm also predicting that the Buster Sword will be like a live stream Buster Sword,
Oh my
like
gosh.
charged out with the light, because that's the
I
only way
need
to
it.
escalate the
Yeah.
spectacle from where it was in the previous games, right?
Well,
So
and especially because at the end of Remake, Sephiroth
yeah,
deflects the Omni Slash,
right,
right? at the end. So the way to like subvert that is you've got it coming from both ends and the live stream. I think that's
Right.
amazing.
I
So
think the only way to escalate is to make it a live stream nail bat, and that
no, a live stream nail bat. I need
the
it.
only way to
Yes.
save the world is to use and make everyone finish the game with the nail bat.
I love it. I love it. I love it. We don't need materia here.
Yeah,
Nail
absolutely
bat.
not.
Yeah.
When it comes to Rebirth, you've had some time to sit with it, right?
Mm.
6, 7 months or so at this point. How has your appreciation for it grown or lessened? And what themes do you continue to think about as you think about Rebirth in light of the entire trilogy
Um,
so far, I
you
should
know,
say?
despite the fact that I do have a couple of criticisms of some narrative stuff, I think it's still probably the best Final Fantasy game that they've made. Just as a game,
Mm.
it's the best probably FF game.
Well,
It's just
that's a
the yeah,
really that's a
yeah,
huge phrase there that you just
yeah,
said. And like,
yeah,
hate mail and all that kind of stuff aside, goes like,
yeah,
Yeah, you're not
what
allowed to
about
have
9? What about
opinions.
6?
yeah.
What is it about Rebirth that encapsulates what it means to be a Final Fantasy, and especially one that hits like you say it does?
I think that like, a Final Fantasy really at its core is about going on a journey with a great cast of characters, saving the world, of course,
Mhm.
but also too, it's about and this is a very nerdy response, but I feel like it's about like a lot of gameplay things too, like great
Mhm.
character progression systems. Like if Final Fantasy had one specific gameplay identity, I would say that character progression systems is the Final Fantasy gameplay, like
Mm.
more than actual combat even. And I feel like it has that, in the form of materia and folios and like all the other stuff you can experiment with. It's got the combat. It has some of the auxiliary things that we've come to associate with Final Fantasy, like mini games.
Mm.
Um, Again, it also has like a lot of core tenets of like what Final Fantasy should be, such as a giant world map, which has gone away in recent years. And the world map is finally what a Final Fantasy world map should look like in HD. It
Yeah.
is a one for one proper remake of a Final Fantasy world map to scale.
He
Which I mean, and people have been asking for that
Yeah.
for decades or 2 decades almost since like after 10, right? And they brought that back. So they fulfilled, I think, what the core of Final Fantasy is, in so many different angles. And then on top of that, too, I think that the volume of content in this game and the quality of that volume of content is so great, is so overwhelming,
Mm.
that no other FF game really even comes close to providing all that.
A lot of discussion about mini games in
I
this one. Some
Yeah,
people love them,
yeah.
some people don't. Like, where do you sit on this? Was this fluff, padding, or is it true to the Final Fantasy legacy?
I think it's true to the legacy of FF7. I do understand where people are coming from with the too many mini games. Like for example, a game that I felt like had too many mini games or too many gimmick fights was Kingdom Hearts 3,
Hmm.
and that was terrible for me. But at the same time, though, too, I feel like most of them are not mandatory to enjoy the main story of Final Fantasy VII, and most of the good
Mm.
ones are the ones that are the mandatory ones, right? And also, I'm not a platinum trophy guy. That's another thing that distinguishes me maybe from the rest
Yeah.
is that I feel like whenever I go in platinum a game, it creates a toxic relationship between me and the game.
What level of self-regulation do you have? I mean, that is like you just don't hear
Yeah,
that. People are like, but I have to."
yeah.
So how
right.
are you not compelled to do that, even though you enjoy a game, right?
Every time I try to platinum a game, it could be a favorite game of all time. I love
Mhm.
it. At some point, when I have to do something, some aspect of the game that I just simply do not find fun. And I think almost every game has like, a scale
Yeah.
of content that is really good to really bad. And when I'm sitting through the really bad content of a game, usually that's very optional, that I am just not enjoying
Yeah.
at all. I'm just thinking the whole time, why am I wasting my limited gaming time doing this so
In
I can have a
life.
bragging right? Yeah. And so the opportunity cost of getting a platinum trophy versus just moving on to a new game never seems to like in the platinum never seems to weigh
Yeah.
heavier to me than just playing a new game.
Yeah.
So,
Oh man,
yeah.
that's
Totally.
that's great. That's great advice, and I hope that's freeing for our listeners,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If
Somebody
you're
is
not having
Once the
very
game
fun,
is
mad right
yeah.
now.
just stop.
Yeah, just stop.
You,
Stop.
yeah,
Like
you
you
don't
don't
have
have
to.
Do
to.
something else in a game as big as
Yeah.
Rebirth, especially. There's other things you can do that are going to be more fun, and that's go for it. You're free.
Right. Right. And I appreciate games that big too that have
Yeah,
that much content because as I go back and replay them, I can choose to do different content that I didn't do before.
that's
Which
right.
gives me like years of kind of enjoyment of that game. But trying to like do all of it in one playthrough, I usually just hate myself and I hate the game too.
Well, there
Well
was some
said.
there
Yeah.
was some symbolism I know that we wanted to get to, and some of the meaning and some of your interpretation on why they made some of the decisions and told the story that they did. As we kind of continue on in this section, Wade, I wonder where you want to start with that.
Yeah, so we've really kind of talked about a lot of the high points of the game and some of the questions and stuff. I'd really love part of this series is making sense of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I would love to know some of the themes, some of the story beats, all that stuff that have helped you make sense of what's going on in the Trilogy, Rebirth specifically, and has helped you grow an appreciation. Kind of going back to that idea of playing games for these deeper meanings that you may not see as a kid. How might you help us think about this game in that way?
Mm. Yeah, so one of the things that we were talking about before stream, that I've really come to realize with like Final Fantasy VII in particular was and this is like, how should I say this? I kind of like when I was in like my early 20s, I would read like a lot of like Taoist philosophy. I just found it like really interesting, right?
Mhm.
And there's always talk in like a lot of Eastern philosophy about the ego and kind of the separation of self from the greater whole, right?
Mhm.
And kind of the thing about man is that man has both the privilege and burden of being aware that we're both an individual and part of the universe at the same time, right? So we're both part of the whole and separate from it temporarily at the
Mm.
same time, right? And through that, this sense of me, the ego, um, kind of rises up. And I've always found Final Fantasy VII to kind of make some particularly interesting statements about that really subtly. And in two ways that it really jumps out at me. And one way we have Sinra, right, which is man's uh, corporate way of
Mhm.
kind of like assuming the role of God, right? The ultimate stage of ego is when when man kind of sees his own form, basically, as you know, the ultimate thing ruling over the universe. And
That
I've always, yeah.
time out for a second because what you just said was so good. Kind of the ultimate form of ego is when man realizes his form as that God or that divine, that highest
Mm,
sort of piece. That's huge, right?
yeah.
And you do see this with Shinra and certainly with certain characters. But I wanted to make sure that our listeners heard that
Mm.
the highest form of ego is that. I think that's really compelling. Thank you for that.
Right.
Sorry to
And
interrupt. I want
so
to make sure we
no,
got
no,
that.
no, yeah, no, because I would love for you to add even more
Yeah.
context to this. And then I think that we see that element of God again. We see it in Shinra and we see it in Sephiroth, right?
Mm.
And with Shinra in particular, when you look at Shinra's logo, one of the things that the developers specifically chose to do is that with the spelling of Shinra and in the logo, you'll actually see the kanji for God, right? And so they
Okay.
specifically chose to use that character for God, um,
Wow.
to spell Shinra,
Let's
right?
talk about what kanji are, just for those who
Yeah.
aren't familiar and everything. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So Japanese loans around 2,000 Chinese characters from Chinese. Um, Sometimes it uses more than that, but there's around 2,000 common ones. And the same kanji that you would use for kami, which is God,
Mhm.
is the first character that is used to spell Shinra in Japanese.
Okay, wow, wow. So this is
Yeah.
something that I did not know. Um,
Yeah.
this is incredibly compelling. Now,
Love this part of
did
the
you
show.
kind
Yeah.
of did you discover this? Like, how did you come to this? Somebody tell
Oh,
it to you? Like, what was this?
I study Japanese casually, and then
Oh,
I also yeah
as we
I
do.
kind yeah I say casually, but I've really been at it for 3 years, and it's actually a lot more than casually. But yeah,
That's awesome.
I
Wow.
What made you want to
yeah,
do
so I'm
that?
like, oh man, so I just always wanted to do it because I just love Japanese games, and I just always feel like learning a second language is something that like we should all do.
Yeah.
I mean, knowing two languages is also,
Mhm.
by the way, associated with so many positive mental health outcomes,
Oh yeah.
including delaying the onset of dementia by like 5 to 10 years in some studies. People who are
Wow.
bilingual or more. Yeah. So if
Okay.
you don't study a second language, you should study a second language because like the benefits that it has on your brain are like profoundly deep. Um,
This would be a great
so
spot, Duolingo, for an ad spot.
yeah,
Hint, hint.
Yeah.
yes,
Duolingo
yes.
sponsor us. Come on.
Yes, they need to reach out to you. But yeah, so it leads to a lot. So I was like, okay, that's like a thing I'll do for sure, just because I want to know Japanese. And so yeah,
Cool.
and then you also have Sephiroth's ascent uh, to godhood as well. And the
Mm,
commonality of Shinra and Sephiroth is seeing themselves different, separate from the greater whole, right?
yeah.
And then what's interesting about that too is that both of these entities that see themselves as different from the greater whole, they see themselves as better, superior. But then they're also
Mhm.
using that greater whole to basically be the thing that they are in the same sense too, right? Like Shinra needs the life stream. They still need the greater whole. They still need um what one might actually describe as like the true God, especially in the context of Final Fantasy VII, as the thing that's actually strengthening them to even have the ego in the first place, right?
This is such a rich conversation,
Yeah.
because when you're talking about this idea
Yeah.
of ego and God and those that would be gods, I mean, you've got
Mm.
the birth of a god is one of the
Yeah.
signature final boss fights for Sephiroth in the original game, and you've got Shinra trying to attain this level. What I keep thinking about is an ego that is going to affect the collective whole is all
Mm.
about control, right? And everyone in this game, to some degree, wants to have some level of control because they feel like they're out of control. In the original game and
Mm.
in Remake, Barrett says, "There ain't no getting off this train we're on. Trains are on tracks. They can't decide where to go and stuff." And then, as part of that kind of meta self-aware narrative, you've got this conversation about the whispers, right? How they are in control of the individual life. And so you enter Shinra, you enter Sephiroth, who want to either utilize or subvert the control of the life stream of Mako for their own purposes. And
Mm.
therefore, they are able to enact control on the entire world as that sort of thing. Meanwhile, the primary party is trying to mitigate that level of outside control so that each person can have their own agency and control in their own lives
Mm.
to a degree. I
All
think
right.
that's a really interesting dichotomy there. Um, how do you make sense of that? Like, is this what you're kind of getting at between this idea of um, people trying to attain godhood to some degree? Talk to me a little bit about the relationship between control and why does Sephiroth want it, Shinra, and even the characters in the game.
Right. I think that there is this idea of things always being better. This sort of like infinite growth,
Mhm.
infinite uh improvement of situations and things being better. And then also too, with wanting that control, we know who we are. We have identity that is
Mm,
derived um, from our sense of control, right?
mm,
And so because of that, identity ends up playing a big role. And as I mentioned, man has like a privilege and a burden to be aware that we are both individuals, but also part of the universe too, right? And so I think it is great that they decide to kind of center this narrative around Cloud, sort of not quite really knowing who exactly he is, right? And so he has to, for him, almost, having that sort of like, identity that he's able to assume
oh my gosh,
allows him to sort of control the situation, right? To have like that role, you
mhm.
know, you know.
Y You are so full of these little nuggets of wisdom here. Humanity has
Yeah,
the privilege and the
yeah,
privilege and the burden of knowing
yeah,
oneself as well as knowing that they are part of this greater whole, and I
right,
love that you've got this kind of both sides of this coin, you know?
yeah, oh,
Um, you
yeah,
can't just say that you're part of the whole without the ego, and yet you can't just be yourself isolated. We
right,
spoke with BioRoxas recently in one of these interviews, and he said we
mm,
are wired for connection. And it's the
mm,
same idea that if you don't know yourself, can you really be in connection with others? And this whole collective whole sort of idea, how do you contribute to that without losing yourself in it? Which, oddly enough, is one of the issues of Sephiroth, right? He doesn't
right,
want to disperse into the live stream, so he's resisting that
right,
kind of assimilation into it. I think
right,
that's a fascinating resistance.
right.
It's
And
good,
what happens when someone becomes part of the live stream, right? Too, right? Is
right?
the ego dissipates. And in the novels too, they talk about how Sephiroth, by holding on to basically hatred, by holding on to his memories of Cloud,
Mhm.
Sephiroth is able to know who he is. And so, maybe actually really to answer your earlier question too, is, basically to have that identity is also what we need to have our ego, to have our sense of self too. And so Sephiroth is able to maintain his ego by knowing these are the people I hate. This is what I don't like. And he's able to maintain self within the live stream. And it almost kind of describes that as like a poison, right?
Oh,
Like Sephiroth is like poisoning kind of the greater whole by holding on to self within the the mass, like the greater whole, the spiritual energy of everyone.
Oh, that's such a great point, because it
Yeah.
really is like a virus, a
Yeah.
poison that is seeping into the entire planet.
Right.
Somebody in the comments of one of these
Yeah.
conversations or playthroughs or something on YouTube mentioned the idea that Cloud has this kind of sickness in his
Hmm.
own psyche, right? And what's interesting about the remake trilogy is that that same sort of sickness of self has infected the planet to some degree
Hmm.
in this. And so it's almost like a preservation of the planet self in lieu of, say, Sephiroth's self or any other, comer that might try to subvert
Yeah.
it. I think you've brought up a really, really interesting point. So what do you do with that? This game about these incredible themes of ego and collective whole, how do you assimilate that into a deeper meaning that is meaningful for you beyond like, oh, that was a cool thing, and then move on with your life, right?
Right. It's interesting because I think for Shinra, for example, the inability to kind of see the greater whole
Mm.
makes them keep going. We have to keep pumping more Mako. We have to keep, providing more value for the shareholders.
Mhm.
we have, we have to keep doing these things because if we don't, we lose control. But at any point, Shinra could stop.
Yeah.
Like they don't have to actually keep going. They already own the whole world. And then
Mhm.
even still, they want to keep going, right? Because that's sort of what the unchecked ego is. The unchecked ego is this thing that has to keep feeding on other things
Yeah.
to keep amassing like its own identity so that it can continue to feel important.
Purpose.
How do
Yeah.
you see
Yeah.
characters check their ego in this game?
I think Clouds is probably the most obvious, right?
Okay.
After the live stream sequence, and he has to like put himself back together and really come to terms with who he is. I
Mhm.
think for other characters too, um, that like who's a Barrett is also probably like a really phenomenal example too, where there is just I think there's a lot of moments, toward the end of the game, especially toward the end of like the OG, where Barrett kind of reflects on everything they did as Avalanche. And I think too, like maybe in like Remake, for example, there's a lot of good scenes where
Mm.
Barrett is kind of reflecting on, the number of lives that all of this has cost, that that even he like his identity as, as Avalanche, as this freedom fighter has had such a toll on him and everyone that he's loved. And so, even him where he's like, kind of maybe representing the ego coming up again to defeat the ego so that the ego can have yet another purpose.
Yeah.
Which is like a kind of like another thing that I think a lot of Eastern philosophers will kind of speak on is that like, you have to beware the ego kind of like defeating the ego so that you can have the new ego of the ego that defeated the ego, right? Essentially.
Yeah, is
Right.
everybody following that way?
Yeah.
But, you're exactly right. I mean, there
Yeah.
can be almost too much attention to the ego instead of the whole and stuff, but then you've always gotta be careful of continually checking that. It's not a one and done sort of thing, but it's almost
Right.
like a new way of
Right.
existing, of thinking, of checking yourself,
Because then
which
you
I
become self-righteous.
right,
Do
right,
you,
which
do,
is a massive, massively
Uh,
problematic.
what about
yeah.
And
characters like Tifa and Aerith, Yuffie, Jesse, some of the female characters? How do you think the game portrays their experience with ego and how it interacts with the
mm,
world and impacts those other characters?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer for it. Aerith in particular would be really interesting. I'd be really interested to kind of dive into how that plays a role for her because I feel like there is definitely something there.
Yeah, maybe we can just all talk about it a little
I
bit.
you know what? Actually, I would say that Rebirth maybe does have something kind of set up with that, and I think it comes with the scene with Gina Talk.
okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so in,
Where
Cosmo
yeah.
Canyon, after
Good job.
Red's
Explain.
trial,
Mm,
you get this kind of moment where he realizes his father's, legacy, but then that moment is interrupted almost by, this representative from the Gi, who is a former civilization that, um, is extinct but also not extinct. They're in this almost limbo state, and Guy Natak is their representative that's come to speak to Cloud, Red, 13, or Nanaki, and the rest of the characters. So with that, yeah, please talk about that.
right. So in the original game, the Cetra are kind of portrayed as like very pure,
Yeah.
right? Like in a very tropey way. And then when we learn from Gina Talk, then Rebirth, the Cetra are actually maybe not so pure. Maybe they had some perhaps discriminatory feelings toward the
Hmm.
Gi, right? And so I do think that Aerith does have to kind of come to terms with that. Maybe the Cetra have also committed their own sins in their own way too,
Mm.
where they also were not as tolerant of the Gi as they could have been.
Hmm.
Yeah, she does not allow, or she's constantly calling into question when people are trying to lump her into a group. Like Barrett talks about, people that are stupid and falling for Shinra's lies, and she's like, "Hey, is that me? Are you talking about me?" And he's like, "No, no, no, I didn't mean that." Like, even though,
Yeah.
and then here, she said, or Gina Talks makes the statement about they're an intolerant people, and again, she raised her hand. She's like, "Am I intolerant?" Is that me? And I love
Yeah.
that, like, there is this preservation of, hey, I am part of this collective whole, but I also have my own story to tell. There's some ego
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I'm wresting control again. By the end of the game, Aerith's story has continued, it's culminated, and all this stuff. We've got to talk about the end a little bit here because,
Yeah.
um, you know, so much of the game is pretty much the exact same, more or
Mm,
less, than the original, or to the original. But the very final bit, um, kind of expands in a lot of ways. There's a question of
mm,
what's going on with Aerith,
mm.
what will continue to happen. Maybe process that with us a little bit. What was your take about what happened in the ending, and especially regarding Aerith, ego, the collective whole of humanity in the live stream? I would love to hear your take on the ending.
Okay. Yeah, wow. The ending is a lot.
Hmm.
The ending is a lot. So in terms of like the actual fate of Aerith, if I'm to give my take on that, she is dead in this game.
Okay.
And part of the reason that I'll say that she's dead is pretty much just the way that Rebirth plays out, right?
Mm,
Like, I mean, Rebirth plays out in a fairly faithful manner up until the final um, third or so of the game, maybe even less than that, honestly. Really, in that last quarter, maybe.
mm,
And so, under the assumption that the third part is going to do something similar, I don't think that you can have a living Aerith in any capacity and do that. But the idea for some, I guess, is that she could potentially be alive in another world, dream, whatever terminology that you want to use for whatever is going on there. I feel like the setup for that scene though is that ultimately this is about Cloud finally letting go of Aerith. Like
mm.
finally having that scene where he accepts her death
Wow.
in a real with a real sense of finality to it, right?
Mhm.
Um because we don't really even get that, I think, in the OG. Because the last place that thread leaves off is this scene in the ending. Cloud has like Tifa in his arm, and then he's thinking about the live stream, and he's like, I could see her there, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and then even in Advent Children kind of has like I guess the real resolution to his sense of basically traumatic guilt about Zach and Aerith and when they walk out of the church and that but I
Well,
think that this is wanting to incorporate that within the main story,
I
that
think that that's
process
a
of grieving.
really,
Yeah.
really good point that you're making there. We will get this in the comments. I just want to say it very quickly. There's some
Mm,
question about the translation in the
mm,
original game on that one
yeah.
scene where Cloud is holding or excuse me, Cloud is holding Tifa and says, "I think we can see her there," we can meet her there. And then there's a translation question of in the Japanese, I think.
Oh, really?
Again, yeah, but it's a we can meet or see them there. And so the only reason I say it is because there is a question of is he thinking just of Aerith or is he thinking of Aerith, his mom, Zach,
Right.
all of these others? And so, but there is this
I
interesting
think I think
piece,
both of those are really good. Yeah.
right? I can go
Yeah.
either way on that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting if they are saying, as they chose in the original English in
Mm,
1997, to see her there, is this a moment of finality for him accepting Aerith's death? And I think I think you're right. Part 3 is gonna be about acceptance.
right.
In fact, the devs have thrown out some keywords saying Rebirth was about bonds. I kinda think that part 3 is gonna be about acceptance. Um,
Yeah.
and, to your point about Final Fantasy 15, I would not doubt it if in part 3 we've got all of these options and illusions of options of worlds, and they accept the one that they're actually in, where Aerith dies,
Right.
where Zack dies. And what a subversion of the JRPG trope at that
Right.
point. Shall we
Mm,
defy fate and destiny, or is this the best course for not for the ego, but for the collective whole. Boy, that'd be a really interesting
Right. Yeah, I do think
banger
that'd be
thing.
really interesting. Yeah. And especially too, there's that scene at the end of Remake
Hmm.
where Aerith essentially says, if we change destiny, we'll be changing ourselves because, we are basically, the sum of our experiences. And
Oh,
by
yes.
changing the things that we are destined to experience, we're fundamentally altering who we are. At the very beginning of this talk, when you asked me, about like, my story, I dropped out of college in my senior year. I was this close to having an entirely different life trajectory, and it all happened on a whim.
This is exactly the reason that we ask these
Yeah,
questions,
It's
right?
crazy.
Because
yeah,
like we see people as they are in this moment, but if you take
yeah,
even one thing away from their past, you're a different version of yourself here. And this is the
right,
question of rebirth and remake,
yeah,
for that matter. What can be unmade in the past in order to make a different present reality? That's the question of
right,
Sephiroth
right,
versus Aerith, perhaps, who's saying, no, 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 we can't change the past.
right,
Instead, we can change the future. It's unwritten, and starting now, we can do that. I think that's an incredible
right,
message of this game. When you think about the
yeah,
message of rebirth,
mhm,
um, to the gaming space, to personal gamers that are kind of living their life, what themes of inspiration or message of I always talk in my classes regarding mythology and religious
mm,
studies and all this stuff. Truth is greater than fact, right? And
mm.
so a myth is something that may or may not have ever happened at one point in time, but in some ways happens every day, all the time. And that leads us to what I would call truth beyond fact. What do you think are the kernels or nuggets of truth about the human experience, about the world that you take personally from this remake trilogy?
I think one of the things that they're exploring that I find incredibly fascinating, or at least this is how I read that they're exploring it, right? When we talk about identity and how our experiences, in the way that FF7 would definitely refer to them, would be memories in particular. We
Mm,
talk about those memories, right? And how much they define us and how much they define who we are in the present. I think that one of the interesting things they're exploring with these worlds is that they're kind of showing you all the different expressions of you,
mm,
right? All these different identities that you could have. And then from seeing that, like if you could see, the multiverse of yourself, if I could see, the branch where I went to college and I finished and that happened, if I could see the other branch where um, I became the YouTuber that I am now, and then I see the other branch where
mhm,
when I bought that electric guitar I mentioned, I actually became like a really good guitarist, and then I
right?
joined a band. I would then have to question in a really profound way, who am I? Which
Yeah.
one of these realities is actually me? And in a weird way, all of those realities are me.
Sure.
All of these realities are you, yes. And boy, that's such a great message that we're taking from
Yeah.
Remake, right? Because there's different versions of Cloud. There's various versions of Aerith, even though she has this kind of ability to navigate and traverse and all
Yeah.
that stuff. Lots of explanation on that from other channels, I'm sure. But it is so interesting to consider what could life have been like if I had changed that fork in the road. And for people that are, approaching middle age and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
these are questions we ask, right? And in this game, I hope personally that we lean into that level of acceptance of like, yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way. Um, and I mean, there are days when I may, vary in that conviction, but I think that the message here is like it's going to be good, and I'm going to make it turn out good, to some
Right.
degree. So I
Right.
don't know. That's good. Did you imagine that we would go to the places that we did today in this conversation? Because I did not.
Man. Yeah, no, this was great, man. I think we had some some really, really profound thoughts here.
Well, and
Um,
one of the
yeah,
things that I'm appreciating about it,
yeah,
and especially for my students that are listening to this, and for any other viewer or anybody, is like these games do mean something in our own stories, right? And there's an
mm,
intersection here where we can find our own life and meaning with unclouded eyes, to use this term from Sephiroth, I
yeah,
guess, or we can see the reality and the truth of the moment, maybe without regret and all those kind of things. It's really good stuff.
right.
So, Evan, do you have any kind of follow up closing questions?
Well, we always want to give you the opportunity if there's anything that you
Yeah.
wanted to bring up or share that we didn't ask or chat about. We want to give you a chance to make sure that you get to share that or say that, and then we'll let you tell people how to find you and stuff like that after we
Mhm.
give you a lot of compliments on your great work. So, first of all, anything that you didn't get to mention or that you had in mind that you wanted to make sure that we included here as we kind of wrap up.
Oh, yeah, I guess the only thing that I wanted to like tie into it that we didn't get to mention was
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that if you take Final Fantasy 7 and you take Final Fantasy 10, one of the biggest differences between those two games is the architecture, and I don't just mean like the the look of the architecture. I
Mm.
mean like the vertical length of the architecture. Final Fantasy 7 has a ton of very tall places, right?
Yeah.
Places that sit high. And part of that is like kind of like that Tower of Babel, like, challenging God. Again, that ties back to Shinra, right? And
Mhm.
the wealthy tend to live high up in Final Fantasy 7, and the poor people tend to live in lower places. Um, and at the same time that they're living lower places, they are closer to the earth. They're closer to what Final Fantasy 7 perceives as God, right? And so I find that interesting that the wealthier are in a way living further away from God, and that the poor people are actually living closer to it. And the reason
Wow.
that ties into Final Fantasy X is because, of course, thanks to sin, there are no high places in Final Fantasy X, right?
Wow.
There is no
Oh
high
yeah.
architecture. All there, however, there is one exception to that, and that exception, two exceptions. Those two exceptions are Bavel and Zanarkand.
Okay. So, what do you
And
make of
yeah,
that?
Yeah, why is
Yeah.
that significant?
Bavel and Zanarkand are the two places in defiance of God.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh man, that's a
yeah,
great interpretation there. That's
yeah,
awesome. Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
yeah. And so, like, if you actually dig deep into the lore of sin as a creature, right?
Mhm.
Because a lot of people interpret that Yu Yevon,
Mhm.
the summoner who created sin, was God in the religion. But they don't
Mhm.
actually really regard Yevon as literal God. He's like a great philosopher, teacher, but they don't think of him as like the creator or anything like that. Um, but I do think like as you actually find out about Yevon, and it's unfortunate that the game doesn't really explicitly kind of elaborate about this,
Mm.
but Yevon himself, the way in which he created sin was that Zanarkand and Bavel were in a war,
Mhm.
and in order to win the war with Bavel, he essentially made everyone into a faith so that he could essentially form sin, and everyone else would continue to live on as an unsent. So Xanarkin would be like this dream construct, much like Titus, right?
Mhm.
Um, and he would basically use sin as like a basically as a weapon of mass destruction to finally defeat uh Bavel.
Hmm.
But Bavel ended up using it to politicize and create a religion in order to control people based on sin. Um, and so I just find it really interesting that, the two or like civilizations that essentially are in defiance of like, what the religious structure are also have
Mhm.
very, very tall buildings, and they also have machina and technology, and they're able to live in defiance of God. And there's exceptions made for them, but they're not made for everyone else. Right. So I found that interesting.
in the sense of scale that you get to experience in playing a video game is different
Yeah.
than watching something. Like you can, if you want to see how tall something is, you can walk up to it and look up, right? And you can
Yeah,
see
yeah,
how big it is. So the way that you experience that scale and the meaning of it and feeling enveloped or feeling open,
yeah,
and the way that they can change that. I thought they did a really
yeah.
good job of that in 7. As you go from confined
Mm,
areas when you're in these tight choices where the paths in life that they're choosing seem to be constricting, but then all these open things start to happen as you explore, and then
Hmm.
you'll go into like a
mm,
through a small tunnel into a giant area like in the temple, right? And then they'll change gravity and stuff, right, to make you feel like you're on your head. Like I thought that was a
yeah,
really creative way to use that architecture to help us
yeah.
experience some of those themes. That was really cool.
Yeah. Also, I just want to throw in like one more interesting thing about Sin too is that Sin actually one of the reasons that Machina does attract Sin is because Sin as a Xanarkin construct, Xanarkin having all the best technology, they wanted to attack any civilization that could ever get any better technology to them.
Mm.
And so Sin is kind of like programmed to be attracted to Machina and to basically anything in defiance of the religious construct that they have in
I'm
place.
gonna go on a
Yeah,
just deep
yeah,
revisiting of the story of 10 because I
yeah,
Oh,
haven't
100%.
gotten to talk
yeah,
about it this much in a long time.
Well, both of
yeah,
these games, and to your
yeah.
point, Ryan, I mean, both of these games have such um, an attention to the divine or the equivalent of a
Mm,
religious sort of focus, right? Whether it's the live stream or whether it is the idea of sin and the sending and that funeral rite and that sort of thing. And I think that both games have a critique for those that would use or manipulate the goodness of the divine
mhm.
for their own ego again, to
Right.
oppress that collective whole. Whereas, who was it? I think Brene Brown once said, a psychologist kind of out of Texas, I think she once said that religion has somehow turned from an embrace of the mystery to an argument of the certainty. And when we
Mm,
get into this certain sort of thing, it's almost as though we can hold the divine. And when you can hold the divine, you can make things in your own image. You can begin to create the divine into your own ego. And while you may not be divine yourself,
mm,
you are able to use that theology or that religious construct to impose a will on others. Maybe it's through guilt, obligation, maybe it's through religious
right.
structures and all of this kind of stuff, but you're in some ways molding the world around you to your liking. This is what we see with Bavel. This is what we see to a degree with the Xanarkand, and we certainly see it with Shinra. And it's one of the
Mm,
things that I'm really curious about once we get to Wutai in part three. What will a different version of planetary knowledge kind of play into this whole thing? Because we also
oh,
see it
for
in
sure.
Cosmo Canyon too, right? I mean,
Yes.
the commercialization of this religiosity, and in some ways, Cosmo Canyon is manipulating the life stream and lore of the life stream just as badly as Shinra, for
Mm,
the oppression of people, right? To commercialize and commodify religion to some
mm.
degree. So I think it's a really cool point that you've made here, and especially comparing these two games. Not the first comparison that 7 and 10 have, right? You've got the guy Shinra and the
Yeah.
picture and the NPC in 10. So
Mm,
anyway, those that know, I guess about
yes.
that one.
Well,
Yes.
Uh, one of the things that I really appreciate about your videos and your kind of style, and thank you for taking the time to come on and chat with us
Seriously.
and for making all the things that you do, is that you have a very deliberative, calm way of being excited about things.
Hmm.
Like it's like the hype is inherent within you. It's not something that you have to generate or bring in. You can be very excited, but you're still talking in this nice tone. But I'm now getting excited. But like you're very.
Yeah.
It's a very cool, relaxed. But it can also kind of create a lot of energy, and it really comes through in the stuff that you do. It's very deliberative, and I love the pacing of it. So
I
if
appreciate that.
yeah, if you haven't checked out any of Ryan's stuff, how would we find your videos? What's the best way to kind of keep up with what you have going on?
Oh man. So the best way is to go to youtube.com/the night sky prince. Also, following me on Twitter. I'm not calling it X.
Fair.
At at night sky prince underscore, because some person out there took at night sky prince, and you don't want to know what happens when I find you. So
Oh, wow. There you go. Night sky threats. I love it.
yeah,
That's
Hey,
great.
a couple of other quick things for you. I see that you are sitting in a very nice chair right
I
now.
am.
You want to do a plug for that chair real quick? How could I get a chair like that?
I
Where
watched
did you
you
get
build
that?
Yes.
it.
So this is a very lovely chair. Hopefully
Look
my
at this
AI won't
guy.
blur it out too much. But this is a very nice Final Fantasy VII Rebirth chair, and also, I mean, look at this, right?
Oh, look at that. Is that
Like this is
Cloud's
like
belt?
that is
Yep.
Cloud's belt, and then
Wow.
yeah, and then if you turn it around,
Oh my
Boom.
gosh, a Buster Sword on
yeah,
the back. Look at that
yeah.
guy.
So it's very nice,
Okay. That's
very
awesome. What
nice,
is that?
and you can use a coupon code Night Sky. You guys can put a link to that at the
Yeah,
bottom.
we'll put it in the link. That's
Yeah,
awesome. What is that? DX Racer? Is that what's going on
it is.
there?
It is DX Racer, their drifting series Final Fantasy VII Rebirth chair.
That's so cool. We'll
Highly
definitely put
recommend
that
it.
in there.
This is like the most comfortable gaming chair I've ever owned. I'm very thankful
Oh,
for it
that's
because I was
awesome.
I was having some back problems with the other chair, and then I got this one, and my back has just been singing hallelujah ever since.
There you go.
Amazing. Okay, and also talking about self-care and body care, we do a thing, we have a phrase around here that we call gains before games, where you're doing real life things that are going to better you, especially in the gym and workout
Yes.
before you get to your games. Drop that arm routine, my dude, because your guns have been shown the entire time. Let us know how week 2 can have those pythons. Let's go.
Oh my God, man. Well, I would say you need to be eating probably around 150 to 200 grams of protein a week.
Okay.
I work out around 5 days a week, which
Okay.
can be a lot, but it's only about an hour. You know, it's your compound movements that are really going to get you there. So your bench press, your squat,
Yep.
your barbell row, doing all that stuff. Do not ego lift. Ego lifting will be the death of you, man.
So are
In
you
some
like an
cases, like
8
yeah,
to 10 heavy, or are you like a 12 to 15 rep at a lighter weight, but keeping 12 to 15? What do
12
you
to
like to do?
15,
12 to
12 to
15 is
15.
it.
12 to 15. And the
Okay.
reason is that like there's nothing wrong with the 8 to 10 heavy. Sometimes I
Yeah.
am doing that depending on like, my mood and like what I want to do, my goals at the time. But honestly, I feel like when you're doing 12 to 15, you have better form, you have less risk of injury, and you're able to just really, squeeze the muscle. Because one of the things, and especially if you're a younger guy working out, you just think like the amount of weight on the bar equals how much of a man that I am,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
know?
it's
And that's so not the case, man. I promise you.
Mhm.
The muscle only recognizes resistance. It doesn't know how much weight is actually on the bar. So,
I absolutely love you for saying that. Thank you so
yeah,
much. Dude,
yeah.
at the next, like at Rebirth Part 3, or a Remake Part 3 launch event, we've got to have some time in the gym at the hotel or whatever. Like, we've got
Oh,
to make sure
yes,
that's going to
please.
happen.
We
So,
need to get Phil Hartshorn in there.
oh,
He's
dude,
the re- he's the
yes.
re- he's the real master, man.
Absolutely
I'm just
is.
following him. Yeah.
We can do some martial arts with him before sunrise. That'd be amazing.
Yes. Yes, I'd love to.
Well, man, thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you.
the time with us. This has been so fun, and I hope that
Yeah,
everybody's gotten a deeper appreciation of you, not just as a content creator, but as a person,
Yeah.
and certainly understanding all the content that you put out. So,
for
thank you
sure.
so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everybody,
Thanks.
make sure that you continue watching our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth lecture series, where we have lecture plays every Tuesday and Thursday night, including more interviews just like the one that you have heard. Thank you, everybody. And make sure that you subscribe and follow us over at ProfNoctis, as well as Night Sky Prince on all of his socials as well, and especially on YouTube. And with that, my friends, walk tall. We'll see you in class.
Thanks to Ryan, aka Night Sky Prince, for the wonderful interview. Thanks again to Husky by the Geek for the intro song. We are loving it. Thanks to Nick Smith, who does our graphics. And most of all, this program is brought to you by viewers like you. We hope you're doing great. Have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next episode. Bye-bye.